us on the live stream, whether you're exploring us for the first time, joining us from the warmth of your home. Welcome. At this point in the service, we also like to take a moment to welcome any visitors or guests. If there are members who brought a guest or visitors who are comfortable standing and then telling us who you are, where you're from, we'd love to say hello to you at this point. Do we have any visitors or guests today? Back here.
But I would say that there are a whole bunch of people in the lobby that are visitors. And they're having such a nice time in the lobby that we'll need to look afterwards.
All right. If there are any visitors who were not comfortable standing and saying who you are, we still would invite you to come to the welcome table at the end of the service. And we have a very important guest today. For everybody here and online, we have a wonderful guest musician, and Anthony will introduce him.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Anthony Edwards, and I'm the music director here at All Souls Unitarian Church, and it's my pleasure to welcome this morning my good friend and birthday boy. We won't say what birthday it is, but it might be a big one. And I hope you'll all help me welcome Willis White. And oh, there we go. That's on now. I'm glad we figured that out. Willis White is our guest this morning, and we're so excited to have him here. Help me wish him a happy birthday and welcome him.
My home is over Jordan, oh deep river, Lord, I wanna cross over into campground. Deep river, my home is over Jordan, oh deep river, Lord, I wanna cross over into campground. Oh, don't you want to go to that gospel feast, that promised land, where there is peace, oh, deep river. My home is over Jordan, oh, deep river, Lord. I wanna cross over into campground. Oh, don't you want to go to that gospel feast, that promised land, where there is peace, oh, deep river. My home is over Jordan. Oh, deep river, Lord, I want to cross over into campground.
Good morning and welcome on this day of remembering. Remembering the testimony and the prophecy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how he made this nation for one troubled, exalted moment see itself in the mirror of history with the arc of justice bending. We have set this time aside that we may not forget. A good resolution to begin the new year, certainly. But pause with me a moment to observe a newer loss. The poet Mary Oliver, modern psalmist of our nature faith, who saw the holy revealed in birds and snakes and bears, in roses and swamps, in sunrise and death, who gave us its portrait and its messages, who died on Thursday. Her poems were often questions, humanist prayers of wondering about suffering and meaning, about consciousness and joy, about the hubris of thinking human was the only way to be. Like this: what happens to the leaves after they turn red and golden and fall away? What happens to the singing birds when they can't sing any longer? What happens to their quick wings? Do you think there is any personal heaven for any of us? Do you think anyone on the other side of that darkness will call to us, meaning us? Beyond the trees, the foxes keep teaching their children to live in the valley, so they never seem to vanish. They are always there in the blossom of light that stands up every morning in the dark sky. And over one more set of hills along the sea, the last roses have opened their factories of sweetness and are giving it back to the world. If I had another life, I would want to spend it all on some unstinting happiness. I would be a fox or a tree full of waving branches. I wouldn't mind being a rose in a field of roses. Fear has not yet occurred to them, nor ambition. Reason they have not yet thought of. Neither do they ask how long they must be roses, and then what? Or any other foolish question. In one of her best-known poems, she issued this confession and this challenge. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Mary Oliver has left us the words of her long conversation, sometimes passionate argument, sometimes ravishing praise, with the divine, as it is present in the world of nature and of human perception. I, for one, am enduringly grateful. May we be lifted into that space of amazement to which she summoned us as we remember her in our worship together this morning. And may the light of this chalice flame recall to us the dawn light of creation in which we live and move and have our being, so that we may spend our one wild and precious life in integrity and joy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is William, and I light this chalice for the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Thank you, William. Now I invite you to rise as you are willing and able, and to speak once again the words of our covenant promise to one another. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now I'm going to invite you to be seated for a moment while Stephanie Revels offers us some reflections on singing our opening hymn.
What I feel when I hear lift every voice and sing. I feel pride in my race, a pride that stems from my ability to survive. It is with pride I see African Americans not only survive, but in many ways flourish through slavery, Jim Crow, and the countless injustices endured during the civil rights struggle. I am proud that we, as a people, can still go on and accomplish so many great things. When I hear lift every voice and sing, I feel love for my ancestors, people as close as my grandparents and parents. I have listened to stories of my grandfather working several jobs, and as my grandmother raised chickens in the backyard to lift up and support my father as he worked to become the first African American to graduate from St. Louis University Medical School. While trying to complete his training, he was told by his instructors and by classmates he was not to touch the white patients. Oh, but when he graduated, his family said together, "Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea." When I hear lift every voice and sing, I feel sad. I see my people still being looked at as less than or not deserving a chance, while obstacles are systematically placed in the way, so that failure appears to be ingrained into the DNA of so many of all ages. I'm sad that my community frequently prays, if we can only save one from this cycle of despair, because the odds of saving more than one seem so low. Oh, but when that one succeeds, we say, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Yes, that star is cast, and we look for more stars to lift up. When I hear lift every voice and sing, I feel hopeful. I refuse to believe that we are not a people of great things. I am hopeful, as the song says, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by their might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope on board had died. Yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over a way with the tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us all far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we meet thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
You may be seated, and I invite you to join me in reading responsively the words of Clinton Lee Scott. Always it is easier to pay homage to the prophets than to heed the direction of their vision.
It is easier to venerate the saints than to learn the human quality of the Spirit.
It is easier to glorify the heroes of the race than
to give way to their examples.
To worship the wise is much easier than to profit by their wisdom.
Great leaders are honored not by education, but by sharing their insights and values.
Grandchildren of those who stoned the prophet sometimes gather up the stones to build the prophet's monument. Always it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision. And in that awareness, our children are now released to their Sunday school classes with song. The recipient of our shared offering this month is the prison ministry of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. And here to tell us a little more about that ministry is one of the people who works most closely with it, Mandy Goheen.
Could you maybe tell us exactly what a pledge of $150 covers in terms of the programming costs? Like what do the incarcerated folk get for that?
Well, that's another really great question. So one of the things that's most important is the $150 pays for their programming fees for them to be members of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. So they're actually voting members. They voted for ordination for a couple times, and they're actual members of our congregation, even though they're living behind prison walls. And how we interact with them, of course, is not digitally like we're doing right now, and how most of the CLF focuses. And so we actually send them things in the mail, and they get a lot of mail from us, thank goodness. Because they're members of the church, they get UU World, just like you and I do when we're members of a home congregation. They get Quest for Meaning every month from us, a paper copy. They're eligible when they join the CLF to take a new UU class. And if they take that new UU class, they can become part of our letter writing ministry and get matched with a pen pal, generally a UU in the free world, who has something in common with them. They also get 2 newsletters a year from us. And in those newsletters, they have options for signing up for both classes from Tapestry of Faith and reading packets. And the reading packets are the way we communicate and we get them reading materials.
Yeah, thanks. And, in terms of the reading packets, I heard through the grapevine that the Worthy Now Ministry program actually created a special relationship with 2 major publishers of Unitarian Universalist literature. I think it's the Beacon Press and Skinner House Books.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that particular relationship, and what do you mean by reading packets?
One of our greatest partnerships is with Skinner House and Beacon Press. And what they do to help us with reading packets is amazing. And the reason they help us with this is because there are so many rules in different prisons about how to get reading materials to people that it can get really inhibitive to get them books and get them stuff. Like they can't have hardback books. They can only receive books from a publisher, blah, blah, blah. So what Beacon Press and Skinner House does is they share with us the PDF of the book, and we turn it into chapter-long letters that the folks who are incarcerated receive, and eventually, after so many months, they receive a whole book. Reverend Meg Riley, our senior minister, just published the book Testimony, and through Skinner House, we were able to offer testimony to all of our members who are living in mass incarceration, so it was really cool.
Wow, that's amazing.
This morning's offering will be shared with the CLF Prison Ministry, and it will be gratefully received now.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. And a long way from home, a long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done, and a long way from home, a long way from home. True believer, true believer, and a long way from home, a long way from home. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, and a long way from home, a long way from home. True believer, oh, true believer, and a long way from home, a long way from home.
Will you add your voice to mine in the words of dedication for our offering? We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
This is taken from Chaos or Community by Martin Luther King Jr., 1968. Racism is no mere American phenomenon. Its vicious grasp knows no geographical boundaries. In fact, racism and its perennial ally, economic exploitation, provide the key to understanding most of the international complications of this generation. In country after country, we see white men building empires on the sweat and the suffering of colored people. However, there remains little or no attempt to deal with the economic aspects of racist exploitation. If we are not diligent in our determination to root out the last vestiges of racism in our dealings with the rest of the world, we may soon see the sins of our fathers visited upon ours and succeeding generations. For the conditions which are so classically represented in Africa are present also in Asia and in our own backyard in Latin America. Everywhere in Latin America, one finds tremendous resentment of the United States. And that resentment is always strongest among the poorer and darker peoples of the continent. The life and destiny of Latin America are in the hands of United States corporations. The decisions affecting the lives of South Americans are ostensibly made by their government, but there are almost no legitimate democracies alive in the whole continent. The other governments are dominated by huge and exploitative cartels that rob Latin America of her resources, while turning over a small rebate to a few members of a corrupt aristocracy, which in turn invests not in its own country for its own people's welfare, but in the banks of Switzerland and the playgrounds of the world.
They Say I Am Illegal by Julia Hamilton. They say I am illegal, but so is anyone who ever rolled through a stop sign, jaywalked, or threw trash on the ground. Not having a visa is a civil infraction, not a federal crime. They say I am here to take your jobs, but the jobs are often backbreaking and underpaid, and we are exploited by those who could never find a U.S. citizen to work under such conditions. They say I bring drugs and crime with me, but it is U.S. consumers buying the drugs and U.S. weapons in the hands of the desperate. They say I am here to live off the system, but I pay taxes too. And yet I live in a shadow economy that denies me the benefits of a secure old age and medical care if I get hurt on the job. They say that English is the only language worth speaking. But the true heritage of the United States is diversity. And I add my words and my traditions to the culture that enriches us all. They say I am just here to have my baby. But who can remember another mother who braved hardship and danger to bring her baby safely into this world? Can you deny Mary or Maria the right to fight for a better life for her child? They say that you will know I am illegal by my work boots and dusty jeans. But what about the student who overstays her visa? The artist who cannot marry his American boyfriend? Or the grandmother who cares for the baby while the mother works? We may not all wear boots. We may have come from many countries, yet we are alike. They say the more I have, the less you have. But you are not diminished if I am raised up. Humanity is enriched when we climb together towards the light. Life is not a zero-sum game.
From the poet Robert Frost. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps where even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made. But at spring mending time, we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day We meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side, comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines. I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in and walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather hear him say it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors.
This message, wherever you are, calling every person, I'm calling near far. See, we're the generation we can't afford to wait. You just started yesterday, and we're already late. Oh, we were looking for a song to sing, search for a melody, search for someone to lead. Oh, we were looking for the world to change. It would be the same. Go on and say if you're out there. Sing along with me if you're out there. I'm starting to believe that you're out there. Come on and sing aloud if you're out there. Tomorrow's starting now. Right now. No more broken promises, no more calls to war. It's love and peace, we're really fighting for. See, we can destroy hunger, we can conquer hate. Down the arms and raise your voice, join your hands today. Oh, see, I was looking for a song to sing, I searched for a leader, but the leader was me. Oh, we were looking for the world to change. Hey, we can be heroes. Just go on and say if you're out there. Sing along with me if you're out there. I'm starting to believe that you're out there. Come on and sing loud if you're out there. See, tomorrow's starting now. If you're ready. save the world. Believe again, start to mend. We don't have to wait for destiny. We can be that change that we want to see. Oh, if you're out there. Oh, if you're out there and you're ready now, just scream it out. Hey, shout it out if you're out there. Sing along with me if you're out there. I'm starting to believe that you're out there. Come on and sing it loud if you're out there. Oh, if you're out there, I believe that you're out there. Oh, if you're out there, I know that you're out there. Yeah. So if you get this message, here you are. I'm calling you first, and I'm calling you up, you see. We're the generation who can't afford to wait, because the future started yesterday, and we're already late. Oh.
Something there is that doesn't love a wall. Call it entropy if you like, that frost heave in the ground and gravity that makes the mortarless stacked stone of a rural New England farm wall unstack itself over the course of the winter and tumble down on one side or the other, leaving gaps like missing teeth. You have to be steadfast and patient to keep a wall like that in place. Every spring, you have to go out and put it back together again in certain spots, stone on stone. It takes a persistent energy to keep that kind of wall going. Left to its own devices over time, it will dissolve into a scattering of rocks across the landscape, blocking nothing, preventing nothing. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. Some primal energy, like a planetary shrug. It's a quirky group of spirits that hover here this morning over our gathering. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., meet Mary Oliver. Joan Olson, Schwab Major, let us introduce you to Jacqueline and Felipe. How shall we remember you all, carry our recollections of you into the shape of our days and the larger meaning of our own lives? More than 50 years now since the assassin's bullet ended Martin's prophetic career, although his message lingers in our minds and hearts, I have a dream. Not the color of their skin, but the content of their character. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Mary's poetic vision and provocation. Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Schwab and Joan, each in their own way, faithful advocates for decades of this community, its message and its well-being as an institution, clear in the expectation that we will carry on where they left off. The little brown children, following their families' hope to find a safer place, a larger opportunity, dead of fever in the hands of an organization called ICE. How shall we live in this cruel, beautiful world that clobbers us with wonder and betrays all that is sacred without pity. It is not enough to do the MLK sound bites. That is the cheap way out. Always it is easier to pay homage to the prophets than to heed the direction of their vision. Dr. King was a subtle and erudite thinker who took on complex topics and argued bold claims in his writing. Sentimental memes only served to domesticate him and drain the power of his legacy. Remembering the man and his times does him no honor unless it asks us, what injustice and inhumanity would he be calling out today? What do we learn from his example about what is required of us in the present moment? It is not hard to imagine where we would find Dr. King today. He would be in San Diego, arrested with dozens of other clergy and faith leaders, trying to deliver a message of solidarity to asylum seekers at the border in Tijuana. He would be marching with the residents of Hidalgo County, Texas, who do not want their property seized by the government to destroy butterfly sanctuaries and wildlife refuges in order to build a wall. He would be working with No Mas Muertes in the Arizona desert to leave life-saving supplies of water and food where scores of refugees have died. Until earlier this month, he would have been protesting at the fence around the camp in Tornillo, Texas, where more than 3,000 children, including many separated from their parents by U.S. authorities, were warehoused. 3,000 out of some 15,000 and growing total, according to NPR. Martin Luther King would have recognized with every prophetic bone in his body, like a message straight from the Almighty, that we are breeding a new generation of implacable terrorists in those camps. Angry young men and women whose families and childhoods were stolen from them by a government utterly without human decency. When the bombings start, no one will need to ask why they hate America. It makes a sad kind of sense that teachers and school facilities in these camps are all but non-existent. What could be more dangerous for comfortable Americans than to let these dispossessed children learn to read? One of the things I wonder, what I wish we could ask, is how Dr. King would have offered the gospel of nonviolence to these traumatized young people. Would he have been able to make the moral high ground make sense to them? Or would their soul murder be so complete that no scrap of dignity or compassion remains to be nurtured and to build on? Consider the fact that 1/3 of these children, at least, have identified relatives in this country prepared to house and care for them until their applications for asylum can be reviewed by a backed up, chaotic, and now furloughed system. Yet the administration would not allow these children to be released until everyone who lives in the household that was to receive them had undergone a fingerprinted background check. This ostensibly was to protect the children, though its practical intended purpose was to uncover other undocumented immigrants. And the proof of this hypocrisy is that the adults hired to work at the understaffed detention facility at Tornio were not subjected to similar examination, although they were required to sign legal agreements not to discuss anything they saw or experienced in the camp. The Tornio facility was closed recently. It was too obvious, too public, too well known. Protesters were camping by its walls, singing to the children. People were watching it on Google Earth and with cameras on drones. Some of its captives were released to waiting families. Others were transferred to lesser-known locations. And my guess is that when we find out where those are, the same thing will happen again. There won't be any iron signs proclaiming El trabajo nos libera. That's too permanent, too accountable. It will all disappear overnight, all the evidence, all the children whisked away from the cameras and the public eye. Reflecting on the legacy of slavery, in which he participated, as we know, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are not to be violated but with God's wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. The Almighty has no attribute which can take side with us in such a contest. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. Call it ingenuity, if you like. A serious student of history would recognize how costly and ineffective walls have generally been. The Berlin Wall lasted for less than 30 years, during which time 5,000 people succeeded in escaping from East to West Berlin anyway. The famous costly and Maginot Line, intended to protect France from invasion by German troops, proved useless against either aerial bombardment or military advances through Belgium and the Netherlands. The Great Wall of China, completed by the Ming Dynasty in the early 17th century, failed utterly to stop the Manchu invasion of 1644 when a corrupt general opened the gates to attacking forces. Feudal European cities were organized around walls for protection against local wildlife, foreign armed forces, and irate or desperate peasants. Yet advancing economic and cultural development tended to favor those who were least invested in or dependent on their walls. The idea of a barrier wall is attractive to the unsophisticated mind, but it rarely works as intended. If human beings are motivated to find a way around it, they pretty much always do. If Martin Luther King were reflecting upon the current alleged crisis of immigration, I wonder if his thoughts might not go back to the crisis mentality of slave owners in the antebellum South. They were an anxious bunch, those plantation masters and urban aristocrats, worried about several things. They worried a lot about their human property taking to its heels and escaping from bondage, reclaiming their inalienable rights and dignity in a place of more equality and justice. They worried about the contempt of their northern neighbors, who demonstrated little respect for their peculiar institution and the way of life that depended upon it, who were disposed to prevent the spread of slavery and to abet the loss of their economic investment by helping enslaved people to ride the Underground Railroad to freedom. The Southern elite worried about the power of their voting bloc in Congress if there got to be more and more slavery-free states to outnumber the slaveholding coalition. But more than any of these concerns, the thing that gave them nightmares was the possibility of a coordinated slave uprising. There were precedents enough to give substance to this fear, lurid tales with truth behind them. From the banks of South Carolina's Stono River as early as 1739, and Denmark Vesey's uprising in 1822, and Nat Turner's rebellion in Virginia in 1831, to the successful takeover of government in Haiti by enslaved people in 1804, and John Brown's abortive raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. Each of these events brought with it violence against former masters and other whites that would readily have been regarded as terrorism by those it threatened. The more frightened the owners became, the more cruelty and repression they exerted to control their own and other owners' slaves. The more inhumane treatment they suffered, the more incentive the enslaved people had to escape, to conspire and rebel, and to exercise violent vengeance against their captors. Something doesn't love a wall. Call it human dignity, the bell of freedom. It brought down the Bastille and many another defense of privilege, wealth, and prejudice. Something in us, it seems, does love a wall, though. Loves the idea of protecting ourselves and our habits and our power against the desperation of those we choose to exclude. The same impulse, I suppose, that back in kindergarten didn't want to share the red crayon, or like to keep all the Legos for ourselves, or was willing to shun the weird kid in order to secure our own social acceptance. By the time of composing the manuscript for his final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? Dr. King had concluded that racism was not a uniquely American phenomenon, but the tentacles of specifically American racism had international reach, particularly south of our border. The life and destiny of Latin America are in the hands of United States corporations, he wrote. Decisions affecting the lives of South Americans are ostensibly made by their government, but there are almost no legitimate democracies alive in the whole continent. The other governments are dominated by huge and exploitative cartels that rob Latin America of her resources while turning over a small rebate to a few members of a corrupt aristocracy. Everywhere in Latin America, one finds tremendous resentment of the United States, and that resentment is always strongest among the poorer and darker peoples of the continent. This was written in 1967, just months before his death, and it was prescient. Nothing about our nation's current struggle to adopt a rational approach to immigration or a just and humane procedure at our borders would have surprised Dr. King. Outraged and saddened him, I expect, but not surprised. The drugs and gangs and violence from which the refugee asylum seekers who throng our borders wish to escape are our doing. We created them through corporate exploitation, political and military opportunism, and humanitarian neglect. The ensuing 50 years have taken Dr. King's title from a national to an international question. Where do we go from here? Do we descend into chaos or arise into community? So far, chaos appears to be the likelier bet, in part because our internal national chaos seems unable to manifest order on any larger scale. Good fences make good neighbors, says the farmer next door, quoting his father's wisdom to Robert Frost as the two of them reset the fallen stones of their wall. Really, replies the poet, if only to himself, my apples are not going to invade and eat your pine cones. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. What are we walling in? Stolen land? The ill-gotten gains of centuries of genocide and slavery? White privilege, traumatized families, oppression and suffering? What are we walling out? The hopes and the trust of thousands of people who still believe, in spite of everything, that America holds the light of promise for human liberty and opportunity. The children who will come to love or to hate what our nation stands for, depending on what we teach them by our actions. To whom are we like to give offense? Well, something there is that doesn't love a wall. Call it elves, says the poet, or call it all that is holy. Call it the energy of creation. Call it God and be done with it. What is sacred at the heart of all things, that bends toward justice and summons us relentlessly to our better selves, that power, that judgment, that universal mercy and mystery doesn't love a wall, has never loved a wall, and wants it down. In 1964, at the height of the struggle for Negro civil rights in the United States, Martin Luther King Jr. made a visit to Germany. In a sermon delivered at the Berlin Wall, he said this: "Here on either side of the wall are God's children, and no man-made barrier can obliterate that fact. Whether it be east or west, men and women, all people, search for meaning, hope for fulfillment, yearn for faith in something beyond themselves, and cry desperately for love and community to support them in this pilgrim journey. Regardless of the barriers of race, creed, ideology, or nationality, there is an inescapable destiny which binds us together. There is a common humanity which makes us sensitive to the sufferings of one another." Call it that then. The common humanity that makes us sensitive to the sufferings of one another. That is the thing that doesn't love a wall. Because more than ever now, we know that this is one world, and nothing that we do or build can separate us from each other's suffering, from the common good, or from our shared future. Let's say so in song, shall we?
is one world. What touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall. Our world is one world. The tides that affect us all. The way we build our attitudes with love or hate we make, a bridge or wall. Our world is one world. Its ways of wealth affect us all. The way we spend, the way we share, who are the rich or poor, who stand or fall. Our world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, where other hearts can hear a different call.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. And so, in the words of Dr. King, the time has come for an all-out world war against poverty. The rich nations must use their vast resources of wealth to develop the underdeveloped, school the unschooled, and feed the unfed. The well-off and the secure have too often become indifferent and oblivious to the poverty and deprivation in their midst. The poor in our countries have been shut out of our minds and driven from the mainstream of our societies because we have allowed them to become invisible. No individual or nation can be great if it does not have a concern for the least of these.
Since what we choose is what we are, and what we love we yet shall be. The goal may ever shine afar, the will to win it makes us free.